Jennifer Turner is a registered psychotherapist and a certified spiritual care practitioner. She has a focus on integrative care to support the challenges of living with the uncertainty of cancer, the hope of healing, end of life needs, and grief work. As a cancer patient herself, she understands how our culture often fails to provide support for the full experience of living with a life-threatening diagnosis. Jennifer is joined this evening by Teal Sisters, Trista DeLulo, Helen Martin, Marilyn Williams, and Starla Fiddler, who will share their lived experiences with us this evening. Welcome, everyone. And Jennifer, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and hello to everybody. It's such a privilege and pleasure to be here. Full disclosure, I have, quite a bad cold, so I might sound a bit croaky, and I'll turn my light back on in a second. I want to just show my appreciation for everybody who's taken their time to be here. This is such a wonderful gathering of amazing women, and every time I'm engaged with your organization, I come away really humbled by everyone's experience and their generosity, because these things are only as effective as the people who show up and the way in which they show up. And what makes working in the cancer community so rewarding is people really do show up. You know, there's no time to waste. We're not going to gather together and talk about niceties. We really do get to the heart of things. So I'm very grateful and very honored to be here. Thank you for that introduction, Stephanie. I've worked with cancer patients for close to 30 years. Both of my parents were cancer patients, so I was pulled into that community very young. And then as a cancer patient myself, I was doubly pulled into it. And I have to say, it was very, very humbling to be diagnosed and to be in that world, because you can know something intellectually, you can know it cognitively, but until you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you can't swallow because you're so scared, you really don't understand the level of fear. So I was very humbled, and that experience has helped me. You know, you have to use it for something. Nobody wants cancer. So to be able to use it each day is wonderful. I have 6 kids. I work as a psychotherapist in the cancer center. I work in spiritual care as well. As a lay pastor, I work in a private practice with people who are dealing with hopelessness, depression, anxiety, all related to health, and have the great opportunity of bringing people together in support groups and one-on-one, and also with their families, and also couples, because as you know, this disease impacts every aspect of your life. It literally turns everything upside down, and you figure it out from the beginning. So I'd like to, this is a conversation, and I'd like to take this opportunity to have each person here introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about your story, and then we'll just take it from there. Who should go first? Who have I got on my list here? Marilyn. I have Marilyn at the top of my list.
Okay. Hi, I'm Marilyn Williams from Saskatchewan, halfway between Regina and Saskatoon, on a farm. We're retired farmers, and I'm retired from working in the health region. I was diagnosed in 2008 with high-grade serous ovarian cancer, and I also had the BRCA mutation as well. So 2 of our 3 kids also have the mutation. So that was the worst part. I was 55 when I was diagnosed, 2008, and I'd lost 28 pounds initially, and I thought that was great, but alas, not a good sign. I had bowel changes, PMS feelings, and yeah, finally my daughter said, get to the doctor. So I did New Year's Eve, and had surgery by early February, and then chemo, carbo, platin and paclitaxel, and I had 30% hearing loss, and with the paclitaxel and neuropathy, so they had to reduce my Taxel. With the BRCA mutation, my one daughter and I that are positive attend the high-risk clinic in Saskatoon, and we have breast MRI once a year and mammogram once a year, just to follow through because of the high risk of breast cancer with that mutation as well. And then in 2012, I had a recurrence. 5 tumors on my colon, which they removed, and then they took out my gallbladder and appendix for good measure, they said. And then I had carboplatin and calyx treatments after that. Then in 2014, I had another recurrence, and this time it was in my spleen, and they took it out laparoscopically. And because there was no cancer showing up on a PET scan anywhere else, I opted not to have any more chemo, and I have been clear ever since, except for 2016. They found something on my liver, but they're just watching it. Apparently it's not doing anything. So fingers crossed on that. So as of February, I will be a 15-year survivor. And I know when I started going through the journey, I really wanted to talk to long-term survivors, and it gave me hope to keep on fighting, and it worked. So thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. What an inspiring story. I agree. I think when I'm working with people who are newly diagnosed, it's one of the first things they ask for. Is there somebody who has had my cancer who's still here, somebody that I can speak to who's actually experienced this and is living a good life, you know, is happy and has family and jobs and life. And it's very inspiring to be able to connect people in that way. Thank you. Helen, can you tell us your story, please?
Yes, hi, I'm Helen Martin in Hamilton, Ontario. I'm pleased to be included in this Living Well with Cancer and its Impact session, because mine is a 40-year experience with ovarian cancer, which brought life-altering changes, but many positive benefits. In the 1980s, my mom and her sister barely lived 5 years with OV, and my own journey began 17 years ago at age 61. My family doctor was cognizant of that family history, and he always included thorough pelvic exams in my annual physical. And in 2005, he discovered an enlarged ovary. And quickly, after an extensive transvaginal ultrasound, a gynecologic oncologist diagnosed advanced ovarian cancer, stage 3C, high-grade serous. I was aware of the symptoms, but I experienced none. And with my family experience, the shock was advanced. How was that possible? I tolerated the common radical gynecologic surgery and 6 rounds of the usual combination chemotherapy, taking me to remission in 5 months and a future with OCC. Throughout treatment, I felt well enough to continue dance classes and performances, providing my second best medicine. I was grateful for every moment I felt well, and I had nearly a 5-year busy period with no evidence of disease. Having a wonderful medical team, husband and family, being in an active support group and church, dancing and delivering awareness information to well women kept worry at bay, and hope became real. Even with my first recurrence in 2010, gratitude for those 5 years sustained me. 2 more recurrences were part of the following 5 years, but I got through them and have had no evidence of disease for 8 years. Survival for me has brought other rewards. Being part of a successful clinical trial, discovery of a new mutated gene prevalent in my family, meeting hundreds of courageous Teal Sisters, sharing facts and my story with women who became aware of the disease and student doctors as well, and raising thousands of dollars participating in Walks of Hope. It's actually been a rewarding new life for me, and I'm happy to share any hope I can with other women.
Thank you, Helen. What a remarkable story. My goodness. You've both you and Marilyn, your stories provide such optimism and hope for people who are newly diagnosed and who are struggling with recurrence, because we're going to talk about in our session the fear of recurrence and how it's sort of the sword of Damocles hanging over our heads, and to be able to hear from people who have had recurrences and are still well and still enjoying their lives is really wonderful. Thank you so much. Starla, can you tell us your story, please?
Sure. So my name is Starla and I'm from Saskatoon. And I was actually diagnosed in my early 20s with a rare form of ovarian cancer. It's called granulosa cell tumor. And at the time of my diagnosis, there was not a lot known about how the doctors would treat it. I was kind of a new case to them. I ended up doing chemotherapy, and I've had a few surgeries at that time, and I went 5 years without a reoccurrence. But unfortunately, at that point of the reoccurrence, they never really slowed down. So right now I'm in my fifth reoccurrence, I should say. I've done multiple chemotherapies, multiple surgeries. Unfortunately, I guess that's just kind of where I'm at. I have a 5-year-old son, and he's really, he's, I guess, the reason that kind of keeps me going. He's fun. He's a fun little guy. But yeah, so I guess that's where I'm at right now in my journey. I've had 5 reoccurrences, like I said, tons of chemotherapy, tons of surgeries. They all kind of blend together at this point. So yeah.
These are, Starla, these are such amazing stories of resilience and hope as well. And I don't want to gloss over, as well as suffering, as well as fear, and of the losses that come with the diagnosis. You know, the loss of innocence in your health, the loss of so many other things that we'll talk about soon, but that resilience, that's one of the things that has really struck me working in this community, is how resilient people are, even when they don't think they have it in them, even when they don't know where they're going to find it. Fortunately, in a community like this, there's always somebody to reach out a hand when you're not sure where you're going to find it. So
yeah, for sure.
thank you. And you talk about having a child. I don't know I haven't worked with anybody in 30 years it's not a tremendous reason to keep going and to be here as long as possible to have a child. It's also the one thing that will drop people to their knees with grief without hesitation, our children, our grandchildren. So I wish you many years with that child. Trista, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi everyone, my name's Trista. I live in Kitchener, Ontario, and I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2016, and I was 31 at the time. I was diagnosed with stage 1C clear cell carcinoma. At the time, I actually had no symptoms at all. My cancer was discovered as my husband and I had just got married 9 months prior to being diagnosed. So we were kind of going through that process of starting a family. And I, for some reason, had this calling to go see the doctor and just make sure that everything was okay. So I went to my local family doctor, had just a typical physical exam where they do, a pelvic exam, that type of thing. They noticed some firmness in my lower abdomen and said, oh, it's probably nothing, but you should probably just go get it checked out, which I did. Had an ultrasound, they monitored it. They noticed there was a cyst on my ovary and said that's very common for women my age. Then just monitored it for 6 weeks. They noticed it had got bigger and said, well, you're probably going to have it removed. And that kind of led me on the start of that path. Eventually I had that cyst removed. Most people said that you're pretty young to have cancer, so not to really worry about that part. And I really didn't think of that at all. And had that cyst removed. The pathology came back and said it was cancerous. So that really led me on my journey. Again, I had no symptoms, so that was very shocking to me. And just with my age at the time, I remember when I got diagnosed, I went home and Googled, which they told me not to do, but of course I did. And I think I came across a stat that said, the average age for someone with ovarian cancer is late 50s, early 60s, I think. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so young, am I the youngest person to get this, or a woman to get this? And, just such a shock at the time. But thankfully I went through, had surgery to a full hysterectomy, had chemotherapy. And since 2016, I've had no recurrences. and, thankfully been cancer free. So I've been very involved with Ovarian Cancer Canada, and especially advocating on behalf of younger women and the different life stage that we're at, and just the certain things that go along with that. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Trista. The title of this session is Living Well with Ovarian Cancer and the Impacts of Diagnosis. So we sort of have the bookends, because the impact of diagnosis, we can't gloss over that. There's a lot of loss. There's a lot of fear. There's a loss of fertility. There's a loss of feeling desire. There's a loss of certainty in your future. And for younger women planning families, for every one of us, the fear that comes, it doesn't feel carefree anymore. So there are a lot of losses. Balanced with that, there's also, many people live very well with their cancer. They learn, it becomes a new normal. So what we want to do is find, how do we balance those two things? And what does it mean to live in that middle ground? I think that what struck me always was, with the diagnosis of cancer, you're kind of being asked to face two directions at the same time, at the point in your life where you're the most terrified and you're trying to figure out everything. So you're trying to, be a research scientist and get your oncology degree at the same time as you're trying to be zen and figure out what to eat, and also be positive. And, people are giving you really strange advice, like attitude is everything, which really makes me want to punch people personally. I had a great attitude and I got sick, so that didn't help me at all. So that middle ground of trying to face the reality and you have to be a medical advocate and a social advocate and emotional advocate at the same time. You're trying to just keep everything from just careening out of control. So that skill is a learned skill that people do acquire with time and support and guidance. So when we say living well with cancer, it's not a flippant throwaway phrase. It's precious. Every day is precious. And I hate this disease. I'm not one of those people that says, oh, it's a gift or it's horrible. I hate it. But, or maybe and is better. I didn't have any choice, much as you didn't have any choice. So what do you do with it? Do you let it make you bitter and angry and locked in fear all the time? Or do you use it as a catalyst for some growth? So I felt at the times where I was the most physically weak, in treatment, scared, clenched, heart beating, sweaty, the times where I was the most physically compromised was where I actually had growth around my emotional resilience, my capacity for love, my capacity for hope, because we redefine hope. Hope isn't just about physical survival. Hope is about dignity and joy and pleasure and all of the things that, to be perfectly honest, sometimes before a diagnosis, you kind of don't pay attention to in the same way. This is kind of going through my life. I work too much. I say yes to too many things. I didn't express anger when I should have. I never said no. All that changed because I thought I have to start to take care of myself better, not just chemo and surgery and radiation, but emotionally. I had to show up in my own life and figure out why I was here and what I was supposed to learn, because I think we're here to learn. I can't think of a more demanding teacher than the cancer experience, but hey, if you have it, then that's what you work with. So we do live in that middle ground a lot of the time, but I don't want, in talking about the things that we can learn and be hopeful about, to gloss over how challenging it is, especially at certain times, at diagnosis, in between, right before a scan, when treatment finishes. Sometimes when treatment finishes is the most terrifying time. It feels like you've been thrown to the lions. You don't know what's going to happen. So I wonder if you guys would like to, if anybody has anything they'd like to share about that sort of living in that middle ground.
I can speak to that, Jennifer. I think for me, like I touched upon earlier, I think you mentioned the losses. For me, it was the loss of fertility. That was really the hard part. Obviously, I was really scared about the cancer. But at that time, like I was also worried at the fact that I'm going to have to make that choice. And it was a hard one because, you're faced with, a terrible diagnosis. You don't know what you feel like you're kind of have a ticking time bomb in you that you need to do something about it. And I remember talking to my husband, just being like, I want to be able to, it was the choice really, and having the choice of having children taken away. And I totally appreciate that there's many ways to have a family. And you don't have to necessarily birth a baby to be a mother. But that wasn't really in my plan, so to speak, or that's not how I envisioned things. And it was just that choice being taken away that was really so challenging. And at the same time, I remember being so focused on the fertility piece, and my friends and family being so focused on the cancer piece. And it was almost like I was over here waving about the fertility and they were over here. And, so that was really challenging for me. Just because I knew that like, this is really going to affect me. I'm the one, this is my life, and this is going to change my life, the direction of my life forever. For me, it was just taking things one day at a time. Obviously having that support group around me, like supportive friends and family that I could talk to. Everyone understood. And even my oncologist, like he was well aware of, how devastating this would be. And he still talks about it with me at like appointments that I have recently, like talking about how traumatic and how tough that was. And it's still been 6 years, and it still is tough at times. Obviously, I think it's just a process of grief that has gotten a little bit easier with time. But it's really still there. To be forced with a choice of like, either like risk your life to have a child, or, have some surgery and treatment and forgo having children, but maybe give yourself a best prognosis. It didn't really feel like it was like, well, how do I decide between that? It didn't really feel like a choice. So, and all the unknowns you have, like I ended up having a surgery, and thankfully, like my cancer was just confined to one ovary, but I had everything out. So unfortunately, I couldn't put it back in, so it's, you don't know some of these things. Right. And that unknown was really, really tough for me. And I'm a pretty positive person, I think. And I got a lot of those comments of, stay positive, which I really did appreciate. But at the same time, that was a big burden on me, because I felt that if, especially after treatment, that's where I think I struggled the most, not so much during, but once you've gone through all the treatments and things are better, everyone's like, oh, life is back to normal. And like, that's where things really sink in. And I really felt the burden that like, people are going to think I'm not coping well. Yeah. And, and it's silly to think that, because I'm like, who would cope well with this? Because like, this is cancer and this is tough. Like, I think it was those expectations I had on myself that were the toughest. No one ever said to me, like, you're not coping well. But I remember finally, like, I talked to a local, like a therapist and things like that. And I got those support systems, and I was part of like a cancer support group where I realized that like, I think I am coping well. I'm coping as well as I can with the situation that I had, but it took me a while to realize that.
Well, I think that, thank you very much, Trista. I think I had a woman say to me last week, she's a stage 4 cancer patient, and she was invited to join one of our support groups. And she said, well, I'm nervous about doing that because I'm afraid I'm going to hear from other people who are doing a much better job of being cancer patients. And I thought, oh my God, we're diminishing ourselves even in that. There's a fear that you're not, because she's not feeling positive at all. She's depressed, she's teary. This is all very new to her, and she needs help. And one of the things that women have a very hard time with is saying I need help and accepting help. So to be honest with each other, to be honest with our families and our friends is really important. We live in a very disease phobic, death phobic culture. So we're always supposed to just be happy. We're always supposed to be positive. I go into the hospital to see people who are days away from dying, and their family members are saying she can't give up. And I think never, she can never say, I'm done. This is it. This is the end of my life. So I do think there needs to be, again, it's that sort of facing two directions, to be as life affirming as possible, to be here as long as possible, and to be open to hope that there are new treatments coming and that there are things that we can do. At the same time, we're mortal and we're in human bodies, and one day we're going to die. So if we do the work or the emotional work around death and dying, it doesn't mean that it's going to make you die sooner. It means that you're going to actually start to find some peace eventually, so that you're not clenched. I didn't want to go through the rest of my life clenched, with fear. I don't want to die. I want to be here as long as I possibly can, but someday I'm going to. So I need to do that work because I'm a human being. You also talked about, that feeling of alienation. I think when you're healthy, it's like we're all over here in the healthy lineup, and then it feels like you sort of get plucked out of that and put into, all of a sudden you're at the cancer center. Now you're in the sick people's lineup, and it's shocking and it's alienating. And I still, every time I go into the cancer center, I think, what the hell? I did everything right. I exercised, I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I breastfed 6 children. I did everything right. So what did I learn? Well, that means nothing. I'm a human being and I have a vulnerable body, and you can't mitigate against being vulnerable and being human. So living your best life with ovarian cancer is about, I think, embracing the humanity of it and being curious about all the things that are available to you to learn. I did a lot of work around emotional healing. There's quite a bit of data about cancer patients. The cardiac patients are the type A, the explosive people. I live with an explosive person. I always said, you're never going to get cancer, but you're going to give me cancer because you're very stressful. So what happens with the type C? We push things down in our bodies. We're the peacemakers. We're the ones who want peace at any cost. And we're not usually, we don't like conflict. We don't like to push people's buttons. So where does all that go? It goes down in here. So I don't think that caused my cancer. I think it was how I can work with my emotions to actually heal as a human being. The cancer, I'm doing my best, as you guys are. But along the way, that feeling of being able to actually own my emotions and say no when I need to say no is very, very empowering. So I'm wondering your experience of that sort of being positive, that need to be positive for other people. Other people love you and they want the best for you. And it's sometimes reassuring for them to see you being positive and being strong, but it can be very exhausting for you because not every day is, up. So I'm wondering how you guys have managed to kind of hold that space between being hopeful, life affirming, but being real about what this is. Starla, how would you manage that?
I think, like you said, it's exhausting when you're
Yeah.
expected to be positive all the time. And I'm told all the time, you're so positive, you have such a positive outlook. And I'm like, on the outward, sure, I do. Like, I'm smiling and I'm happy, but on the inside, like, I'm terrified that, maybe tomorrow might be my day, like you just never know. And so it's, I guess, maybe finding that balance, so to speak. Like I try to be as honest and as, I guess, real life as I can be, but we're all only human. But yeah, I do get that a lot though. You're so positive, but I don't know. It's hard.
The other one is you're so strong. I was
Yes.
like, well, I didn't choose this. So strong would have been, I'll take your cancer. I'd be a hero.
Mhm.
I didn't choose this. So you don't really have a choice. You're
And
going
almost
to
like, it's almost upsetting to me too when I hear that, when people tell me like, you're so strong, like, but I don't feel strong. Like, I'm full of cancer. I'm not strong. Like, it's
Right.
almost, I understand where it's coming from, but personally, I don't like being told that because I don't feel like I'm strong, I
And
guess.
I think partially the reason we react that way is because it's very disrespectful to the actual experience of cancer,
Mhm,
which
mhm.
is being afraid, is feeling weak sometimes, is feeling exhausted, is feeling just tired of putting one foot in front of the other. So when somebody looks at you and says, you look great, you put that all behind you now, and you're so positive, it kind of feels like it shuts you down. Like there isn't any opportunity then for you to say, actually, this is really hard. Even if you weren't inclined to say it to that person, they've
Right.
made it very clear what the parameters of the conversation are. So
Mhm.
I do try very hard to tell the truth in situations when people say, oh, well, that's all behind you. I say, well, that's not how this works. But I don't have to then tell them my whole life story. I just can't nod and smile anymore. I just say, well, that's not how it works. And then if they want to know more, they can ask. Most don't. Most don't want to know more than that. Helen,
I
what
think
about you?
I think I'm the bookend to this story.
Sure.
Totally different, and mostly because the cancer that my family is genetically prone to is a postmenopausal cancer. So I was postmenopausal I was retired. My family was grown and gone, lovingly supporting me. And I happen to come with a positive nature. I say to people all the time that worry about that, you can't grow it when you get cancer. You don't learn to have. So I was fortunate in so many ways. I was fit. I was had a great immune system. I was active and I had a positive attitude. So I was able to carry on, but mostly I tolerated everything so well. I was never, ever really, really sick. I always felt quite well. So I just took that. I didn't go, oh, yay, me. It actually gave me some guilt because in my support group and talking to everyone else, nobody else felt this way. So I had to be careful about telling people what I was doing because it just worked for me. And I used it as every good day, I'll do as much as I can. As long as I feel good, I'll do what I can. And it just never ended. And I lived with survivor guilt for a long time because I was doing so well. I mean, yeah, I had 3 recurrences, but through none of them was I ever bedridden or laid out. It just, okay, this is what we have to do, and I'm not going to say it was easy for me, but I don't remember the bad stuff because I was always working on the good day. And
You touch on a very interesting topic, survivor guilt, which we will talk about. Marilyn, what were you going to say there?
Well, in preparing, because it's been 9 years for me since my last recurrence, I have a tendency to get sort of complacent about it. And but I have to be vigilant at the same time because I know that little black cloud's still always there and it can return at any time. But in reflecting on today's session, it took me back to those hard times. I had some hard times, and wow, it took me right back there. It's tough. And what I found was that the support groups were awesome. I was connected to Cancer Connection and to the ovarian cancer support groups because they got it. You can be real with other women who have gone through the same thing. And you don't want to burden your family and friends with all that stuff, like they don't need to know all the nitty gritty and they wouldn't understand. And they're always just trying to make you feel better. Right. And sometimes you just feel crappy. That's the way it is. Right. Yeah, so that's where I found the support groups just super. And that's why I continue to do it because I appreciated it so much when I was going through cancer treatments and stuff.
Yeah, and I think you touch on something, in terms of with our kids and our families, and even our friends. I was frustrated at times that people said things that seemed a bit flippant or a bit kind of, well, you'll be fine because you're so strong and you've got such a good attitude. And then I realized they're not trying to be unkind. They're a baby, like they have not experienced this. So you can't have wisdom around something you've never experienced. So they're coming at it thinking they're saying something helpful. If it was a good friend or somebody I knew well, I would say, I know this comes from love from you, but it's more helpful if you ask me how this is for me rather than tell me how this is. But it had to be a very good friend because I wasn't going to waste time trying to educate or teach other people things that it wasn't going to be helpful. So, and I appreciate, Marilyn, your comment that it takes you right back because you don't realize how much you've grown and learned and how much stability you've created in your own life till you go back sometimes and think about those early days because they're terrifying. So we talked a little bit about survivor guilt, and I'll come to that in a minute, but I wanted to touch on this fear of recurrence thing because I don't know a cancer patient that doesn't have, or to different degrees. Some people are just locked into fear of recurrence, and so much so that it runs their entire life. And I have patients that, their supplements, their diet, their lifestyle there really isn't much room for anything else. And I never take away anybody's coping mechanisms because maybe that's what they need to do and that's fine. And you have other people that just kind of put it in their rear view mirror until they're forced to deal with it. So I'm wondering this fear of recurrence, it comes up at different times when we're diagnosed, when our treatment is finished, and then of course, when you actually do get a recurrence. I'm wondering if you could speak to that. How do you live with, how do you manage that fear of recurrence?
Well, I can compartmentalize. I know it's there. I know it's a reality, but if I suffered any denial through all of this, it was not thinking about that unless I had to. It's the same with going to the appointment the next day. It isn't till that morning that I really think about it or focus on it because I'm busy doing something else, because so I can compartmentalize.
Yeah.
But what I did do without, and this was unconscious, once I had a first recurrence, and maybe even from the beginning, I was living my life in 2 to 3 year increments, and that was okay with me. I could do a lot in 2 or 3 years because the way I looked at it was, okay, so I get a diagnosis or a recurrence. Okay, that means 6 months, you're back on the track again, you're having medication, you're being treated. There's almost a whole year. And then you're probably going to get another like half a year free. So I had my life into 2 year increments. So that's the way I looked at it. And I didn't let it terrify me. I knew if that's all I had, that's all I had. But again, I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I'm way older and I can say, I've had a good life. But I mean, I didn't dwell on any of those things. It was just in the moment. And so if the moment wasn't good, or if there was a recurrence, then that's the moment I was dealing with. But again, it just happens to be my nature, and it got me through because I was always able to put it where it belonged at the moment.
And I think that ability to compartmentalize, it's hard to teach that. That's
Well,
either
I
part of
don't know.
your nature or it's not. It's
I don't know if you can teach it.
well,
I didn't know I had it until
Well, I sort of taught myself a little bit how to do that because I was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, waking up like with my heart racing. And that's when there wasn't anybody else to distract me. So I would like plan funerals and think about, my kids. And like, I really, at 3 a.m. took me to a very dark place, night after night after night. And eventually I thought, well, I've got to manage this somehow. So I had a journal, and on the one side, I would write the things, I would write those things out during the day. And then I would write out my strategies, my things that gave me hope. And then I would think of it as my daytime work. If I was going to be afraid, it had to be in the daytime because I could do something about it. And then at nighttime, I was like, well, now I need to turn it off. This 8 hours, there is nothing I can do about any of this. I need to turn it off. But it took me a long time. It didn't come as naturally as it did for you, Helen.
Well, and the thing is with me was always that hardly anyone dies of cancer like in the moment. It's not like a heart attack. It's not like getting struck by a car. You've got some time to do something. And so those were the months that I banked into my little timelines. And again, just was hopeful without dwelling on it. And I just found living well with cancer kept me going.
Yeah,
living well kept me going.
Yeah. And as you said, you were fortunate because the treatment didn't make you so sick. You could still do things. Some people are so ill with their treatment. That's much harder.
And I had my days, my early days, but I, again, was so cautious, in those first 3-4 days. Don't call me. I'm under my Afghan with my book. And it just, those almost became my days because I wasn't terribly sick. But people didn't know that and they didn't bother me. And then by the end of that first week, I was back at a dance rehearsal,
Trista, thank you, Helen. Trista, what about you? When did you find the biggest fear of recurrence and how do you manage that?
I think it was probably, once I finished treatment, like I touched on earlier, that was probably the more difficult time just because I felt like the whole treatment period, it was kind of like you have your set appointments, there's you're doing chemo, you feel like you're doing something, you're actively, recovering from something, or you're having treatment, like some type of medication. And then once that, is done and they kind of set you off, and I kind of felt like I was supposed to like skip out of there and be happy and like live a good life after that. It was kind of like, that's when things kind of set in, even though I did a lot of emotional work and a lot of work on myself during the whole treatment phase. It just, I don't know. It was one of those things where it really comes to a head. I just find and I found that with a lot of other survivors, once you've finished that, you don't maybe have that safety net, so to speak, of like all the appointments and not that you're looking forward to these things, but like things
You're being cared for.
you're being cared for, and you're actively doing something. It just kind of feels like now it's like, is it going to come back? Like I'm not taking any medication. I'm just supposed to watch for symptoms. I never had any symptoms to begin with. So I was kind of like, okay, I know I'm quite well aware of the symptoms of ovarian cancer now, but I feel like if there was always that panic that if I start to feel something, well, it must be advanced then, because I never had any symptoms, and I was luckily to have my cancer caught early. So that was a lot. That was in my back of my mind a lot, where it's like, okay, I just have to wait for the shoe to drop. Like just, not once I got to that 5-year mark, I was kind of like, that was what I was like aiming for. And, obviously it took a deep breath then, but it's still very much there. I think, again, it's lessened with time too. And it is very much like, I kind of feel like it is, you're in a car and you see it in the rearview mirror, and I'm getting farther away from cancer, so to speak. But I'm also very much cognizant that, like, it could come back at any time. And I remember talking to another cancer survivor and being scared that I wouldn't be prepared for it again, because it really caught me by surprise the first time. And I wanted to be prepared for if it to happen again, or if it happened again. And it's like, I don't know how you really prepare for it, but I remember her saying, like, you've done it once before, you can do it again. And I was just like, yeah, that's really true. Like, I didn't think I would be able. I remember my first chemo treatment, I thought, oh my God, I have to do this like how many more times? And I thought, if I can get through that, if that's what happens again, I'll get through that too. Like,
I mean, that you can do that.
Yeah, you kind of have to surrender, because I mean, what other choice do I have? I don't have any control over this. All I can do is, live, and I've also thought like this, that makes me inspired to like just thrive with my life, where, like this, it's given me a lot of wisdom that, like, I know what's important now. It's like all the trivial little things that I thought were important before, like when you get a life-threatening diagnosis, it's like, I'm not worried about this or that. It's, you're thinking of your relationships and family and things you want to do. And, it really put things in perspective. So I'm not really grateful to have cancer, but there's a lot of teachable moments in, things that I've realized. So I think it was that after period, that treatment, that was the hardest to deal with.
The hardest for you to manage. Yeah. Thank you. Starla, what about you? Because you've had numerous, as you said, it's an ongoing situation for you. So how do you manage fear? And then where do you find hope? What are you hopeful for?
So like I had mentioned, I had done the chemotherapy, I had my surgeries, I went 5 years without a reoccurrence, and then I had a really big reoccurrence. I ended up with 17 tumors spread throughout my midsection, and like Trista said, I as well didn't have any symptoms then. Like I had kind of what I felt like was menstrual cramps, which made me think maybe something was going on. It ended up being, like I said, that really big reoccurrence. But from that reoccurrence, I guess because it was so big, I had told myself, if I come out of this and I survive, then that's a sign for me to just take life by the horns and just live the best life that I possibly can. And so when I woke up from that surgery, I just remember being so grateful that I even woke up, first of all. And then, after the recovery and whatnot, I just had that mindset. I was just going to keep doing everything that I could, make as many memories as I could, travel. The fear of reoccurrence was always there. And I was NED, so to speak, like no evidence of disease, when the opportunity presented for me to adopt my son. And at that time, I didn't even think twice, because being a mother was something that I always wanted. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to have a child biologically just because of my cancer. So I said yes, because I wasn't going to let the cancer take that from me. So I adopted my son. And now, that fear, like Marilyn said, is always kind of like that black cloud at the back. But I go to my routine scans, I go to my doctor's appointments, I really, really listen to my body if it's telling me something, and I've actually been able to feel that I've had a reoccurrence before even knowing that it was there. But before the scan detected it, I've known that I had a tumor here, I had a tumor there, I've been able to tell. Now that my son's getting older though, like I find my hope in him and wanting to give him the best life as I can right now, because I don't know how long I have with him. And so we travel, we do as many fun things as we can. And I just want him to have as many positive memories as he can. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I draw that hope from.
Thank you, Starla. We touched a little bit on survivor guilt. I want to go to another section also, so I don't want to run out of time, but survivor guilt is a big part of the cancer experience, especially when you're in groups and you're with other people. I've said goodbye to so many people that I really cared about. And, you know, as you said, when you meet people in the same circumstances, you get each other. Like it's a real bond. It is a real sisterhood. And that feeling that so many young women and hopeful women and beautiful women have passed on, I think that survival guilt, you know, why am I still here? Why them and why me? And I think we do it, you know, even though there's no logical or theological, it's just, well, whatever it is. But I think the other thing is sometimes there's a lot of pressure to you have to really make something out of your life. Then if you survive, well, you got to make it count. That's a lot of pressure. That's a big burden to carry. And I kind of figure, you know, just live your best life, learn what you're supposed to learn, love the people around you. I think that is your best life. I think that's the most heroic thing that you can do. But survivor guilt is it's grief. And I think grief doesn't get talked about as much as it probably should in the cancer experience. We grieve the loss of fertility, we grieve the loss of innocence, and we grieve the death of people that we care about. I run stage 4 cancer support groups, and many times the debate comes up, should we have stage 4, stage 1, stage 2, like should we all be together? And it's hard to sit beside people that you know are sick because you are getting sicker, because you see yourself in them, and there's fear that comes up. But there's also humanity and love and wisdom, and then there's peace on the other side of that. If you don't show up for that, you never get to that place of peace and humanity. So I think it's really important that we not look away. And guilt is mitigated by fully showing up, I think. Does anybody have any other thoughts about survivor guilt before I move on from that? Yes, Helen?
Mine was finally eliminated by being aware that of successes that had happened because I survived. Because it was always, well, how come I'm so well? Why am I still here? Why am my mother's gone, my aunt's gone, several of my Teal sisters, many of my Teal sisters are gone. And it started to fade when I saw the response of women in the support group who need us long-term survivors to look towards and to have hope. So it started, I could see there that was a good thing. And I too have been in a survivor group, support group for 16 years, and there's no reason to leave because I have a role there. The other thing is I have a sensitive CA-125, no symptoms ever, but a CA-125 that'll tell me on a second appointment that there's something going on. So again, I have warning, I have preparedness. Being part of that olaparib trial in 2010, I mean, I have several friends who are surviving on that drug. It's being used, they're maintaining and living longer. And I know several people that are on the drug and living very comfortable lives because of it. I think, okay, there's another point, you know, that's why I'm here. But the biggest one, of course, was them finally discovering a mutation in our family. And I'd been tested many times over the course of my cancer, because genetics is a rapidly changing science. And 4 or 5 years ago, they find, because I was retested, my blood work was retested, and there was something, they discovered something, the RAD51D. It was a mutation or a gene they didn't even know about when I first had cancer. And that was discovered. So my daughter, my granddaughters, my female relatives and cousins, they've all been warned and or tested positive or had prophylactic surgery. And I think, yeah, okay, I was here for a reason. And on all of my educating, I lectured and stuff for years and raising, all that money. And I think, okay, all right, I'll take that. So I don't feel guilty anymore, but I have to be careful
Yeah, you do.
because I don't know how it appears to people who aren't doing well when, I could go on about, I'm so grateful to be here.
Oh, I think people are inspired by hearing that. I think we want to hear stories of people who are doing well. I think all of the stories, we also want people who are struggling to be able to tell their story and have that be held as well. I think the truth is what needs to show up in these situations. And I think when you talk about mitigating survivor guilt by all the wonderful things you've done for other people, I also
no, it's that I experience, I'm not done, but that has come back to me. That's come back to me.
Right.
Well,
Right.
okay, yeah.
Right. No, I understand that. And the benefits that other people will reap from just understanding a new mutation, a new situation.
Yes.
And being able to show up and hold a place. I run support groups where people sometimes say, well, I don't need support anymore, and they disappear. And I always say, whoa, 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 hold on here. That's not what support groups are. That would be a different thing. So I think it's really important to keep showing up. I think that the way that we mitigate survivor guilt is also, we all have a different journey. We all have a different reason for being here. I don't know what your reason is. I don't know what your journey is. I just know that we only have so much control. So I think surrendering to what your journey is and learning along the way, there's some wisdom and there's some softening that can happen around that. And that's what grace is. That's what wisdom is, when we soften around these things. We can't be clenched and rigid all the time. It makes us miserable and sicker. It makes everything worse. And that kind of leads into the idea of how cancer changes us. It changes us profoundly. I don't know anybody who is the same person after a cancer experience and treatment. I mean, there's the passage of time. You're not the same person 10 years later, but man, your priorities are different. Are you going to get into a big discussion about what kind of kitchen counter you want? Like, I don't care about any of those things. I won't even get into arguments. I just kind of walk away because I think this isn't serving me. And I live my life one day at a time. I think this wild and precious day, I don't even think wild and precious life, this wild and precious day, that's Mary Oliver. It's mine. So I am not going to throw it away dealing with other people's craziness or conflict. It was a big change in my marriage because my husband would say things and I would just sort of look at him and he'd say, "Did you hear me?" I'd say, "Yeah, I heard you. I'm just not engaging. It's my option. I don't need to engage in that." It was very confusing for a while, but I found, oh my God, I always had that option. So it changes us, it makes us ask questions. Why are we here? And what am I here to learn? And is my life valuable if I'm here for 90 years? What about if I'm here for 40 years? What if I'm here for 30 years? Isn't it beautiful and miraculous and valuable no matter how much time I'm here for? So I think you pay attention to things in a different way. I kind of joke about using the good china. I have this cabinet full of my grandmother's china. We never touched it. It was like a memorial. And I thought, oh my goodness, we better use the good china. We better do the things that are wonderful, that are going to make memories. We have family movie night and we always get silly movies and it creates memories for the kids. At a certain point in my life, I was busy and I was often missing out on things like that. And I thought, no, I'm not missing out on anything that matters. So you change your values, you change your priorities, and you get to find out what are your yeses and what are your nos. And you don't have to defend them. You don't have to explain them. You just learn to live in that. I think that was one of the most healing lessons I learned. I could almost feel cancer cells shrinking when I approach things in that way. Does anybody have any thoughts about how this disease has changed them?
Oh.
Marilyn, how's it changed you?
Well, when I heard that statement when I was first diagnosed, I thought, it's not going to change me. Why should it change me?
Oh, sure.
You know, I'm the same person. But yeah, you do change. I focus more on after the initial shock, talking to God and saying, "Oh, what were you thinking?" and then preparing for death. I prepared for death. And when I did that, then that was done. I could leave that alone.
Put
And
that in
then
the
I went,
box.
Yeah.
right. And
Literally.
then went on living. So I've been doing the living part now for almost 15 years
Yeah.
and trying to pack in as much good stuff as I can
Yeah.
and doing the things I wanted to do. And yeah, just that's how I coped.
Yeah.
And keeping positive things in the future to look forward to. Whether
Yeah,
it's
we need to look forward
Yeah.
to things. That is true.
That
Yeah.
changed for me after my last recurrence. I had an unusual treatment and it worked. But I suddenly realized I wasn't thinking in 2-year increments anymore. The increments were gone. And it wasn't conscious. It was just gone. I just don't do that anymore.
Mhm.
Not that I don't think ovarian cancer may be still my killer, but you know what I'm saying? I'd reached a
You're
point
not
where-
watching it as vigilantly anymore. You're not
Yeah.
keeping a steely eye on it every day.
but I didn't think, oh yeah, it's done now,
No.
because I didn't even know the results of it. I just stopped thinking that way. And now my life is open and, you know,
To be honest, I got really bored with cancer. I got really bored with thinking about it, talking about it, researching it, you know, constantly thinking, what do I eat? What can't I eat? I walked into the kitchen one day and burst into tears because I couldn't figure out what I was supposed to eat. Was I supposed to be plant-based? Was I supposed to be keto? I was just like, I was going crazy. And I thought, I need a break. I just need a week where I'm just a person and I'm with the dogs and kids and I'm just living my life. And I did find, I sort of, you know, you get grounded again in that. What about you, Starla?
Yeah, I understand completely with I'm bored of it for myself, but at the same time, I do really like talking about it as an advocate. I really like
Yes, that's
bringing
different.
awareness to the disease, and I want to educate and I want to share my story to hopefully help other people. But for
Mm.
myself, I'm tired of it. It's like it'd be nice if it would quit coming back. I won't lie. Like I'm kind of done with it that way, but I like talking about it in regards to other people. Like if I could put it here and talk about it and share my story and advocate, but I don't want it here with me. I want it there.
And I think we're not separate from the rest of humanity. There aren't actually two lines. We are all in this together. We're just having different experiences. I did a retreat last spring with stage 4 breast cancer patients, a group of women, and we did this deep meditation. And when that was over, one of the women came up to my room and she said, I had this epiphany. I realized we're all stage 4, like every person, we're all in this together. I'm not separate from the rest of humanity. I'm not going to be as fearful as I was up until now. And I thought that was remarkable. I often think about her saying that. Yeah. So, I mean, how we're living our best lives is that we're laughing, we're loving, we're enjoying everything that we can. We're not pushing away the fear and the grief, but integrating it. You can't have fear and grief over here and happiness and joy here. They're integrated. They're two sides of the same coin. So in that sadness, there's also beauty. And in the beauty and joy of an everyday life, there's a little pull of sadness that we're not always going to be here. And that's the human state. That's not just living with cancer. So I think when you kind of land in that, you stop, the grief becomes less. I also sort of found some faith during my cancer, not traditional faith. I was raised an atheist, and I spent anytime I came in contact with any idea about what happened after you died, I was just a big brat. I was like, well, there's no evidence for that. That doesn't make sense. And then when I got diagnosed, all of a sudden I thought, I'm going to have to kind of roll up my sleeves and see what I think about this, because I needed to experience something bigger than myself. And I needed to stop analyzing whether it was true or not true. I needed to feel something bigger than myself. So whether it's art or music or literature or God, whatever it is that you tap into that helps you feel connected to something bigger than yourself, I think it's a really important part of healing and living. And now we live in such a secular culture. I could talk about sex with people, I can talk about their money, I can talk about what they eat, but when I talk about faith, it always makes people really nervous. So it's personal, it's whatever works for you, but there's an invitation there to kind of wonder about what you're connected to greater than you. I go out in the summertime, I have a pool, and I float on my back and I look up at the sky, and that's my church. I think, oh man, this isn't just it. There is something beyond this. So it helps me to feel peaceful in a way that doesn't cognitively or intellectually make sense. It heals my heart. So it's that sort of state of grace and faith. It's not something you can necessarily articulate even, but I used to go to church and just sit there and say, oh, this is ridiculous. Go in your pool. You'd be amazed what happens.
Yes.
Go for a walk in the woods.
There's a little mantra. I wish I could remember the name of the woman when I first joined or first knew of OCC way back in 2006. I think she was a doctor, and she wrote a little book, and she used a bear as the main character. But what I want to tell you is she had this expression. It took me a while to get it, and I sure get it now. She said, the longer you survive, the longer you'll live. Because in this role with this bloody cancer that there's no screening test for,
right,
all the research that's happened and the growth that's happened has been in survival. In other words, maintaining. So the longer you survive, there's going to be another new pill or another new drug, and you will live longer.
Maybe. And that's why like Kelly Turner's books, Radical Remission, these are wonderful books. These are stories of, well, like yourselves, who defy the odds. I want there to be more research around the people who defy the odds. That's where, like, why? What happened there? Tell me about that. I think we sort of covered the things we wanted to cover today. Stephanie, did we want to open it up to some questions, or have we talked too much and now we don't have time? What do you want us to do?
You know what? I'm looking at the chat box, and it is on fire there. So I think we could have you talk for another hour, but we only have a few minutes left. So we do there's a few topics and a few themes that have come out that I'd like to address. There's a couple questions. So there was in the chat box and in the Q&A, there was a few questions that were fairly clinical. So I just wanted to remind people that tomorrow at 6 o'clock, our first session is, we have a gynae oncologist, Dr. Roberts from Winnipeg, who's going to be speaking. So we're going to save those questions and I'll ask at that. That session is on recurrence. I know I noticed that there was a lot of questions on what do I look for? What are the signs? What are the symptoms? We're going to do a deep dive into that tomorrow. So that'll be at 6 o'clock. Some of the other themes that have come up in the chat box, there are other sessions. So we talked a lot about, in the chat, I saw a lot about genetics and prevention. We have a session coming up after the break on that. We have a great session coming up tomorrow evening on caregiving and care getting. When people say, oh, you're so positive, or what can I do for you? What do they really mean by that? Saying that phrase doesn't mean a lot. So we're going to hear from some Teal Sisters on that as well. The other thing is a lot has come up about support groups and the importance of being involved in a community. So I just wanted to take a minute to just share a couple of the supports that we do offer. So TLT has been brought up a lot. These are organic sessions that happen on a monthly basis. We actually have one coming up next week on a Tuesday. It's at 1 o'clock Eastern time. And then Wednesday evenings, we do a TLT for young women living with ovarian cancer. And that is at 6 p.m. Eastern. I think someone's going to put in the chat the link for those so you can register to join on those. We also have just an exciting new partnership with Wellspring, where we're going to be starting 2 facilitated support groups a month. Those will be professionally facilitated. One will be a drop-in session. So on a monthly basis, the first one, someone is going to put it in the chat. I think the next one is December the 13th, I think, for that one. And you can register. It is drop-in. We also have one starting this Thursday. It is a closed support group, meaning you register and it's 6 weeks. So you will have one session every week for 6 weeks. And there are a variety of different topics, a lot of which we've covered this evening, and a different topic will be covered every week. So that is a brand new partnership that the first one starts, like I said, on the Thursday. Another thing is we have started a peer-to-peer support matching program. So basically you can go on our website or on the Wellspring website, fill in some information and you'll be connected. We've trained over the course of the last month, 12 Teal Sisters have become volunteer peer support volunteers. So they've had some training on that. And you will be connected with one of those and you can connect via email or telephone. And like we've heard is so important, be able to speak with someone who's actually gone through the same things. So that was my little ramble there. We did have one other topic that came up a couple times, and I wondered if anybody had any thoughts or tips or advice. A few times we heard, I can't sleep, I've had lots of chemo, I struggle with anxiety and it is affecting my sleep. Any tips or advice from any of you on that?
Can I just quickly say something about anxiety? I had a session today with a woman. Anxiety often accompanies cancer treatment and the whole experience of cancer and, well, being human. But especially when we've been through treatment and we're very stoic and we put one foot in front of the other and we do everything we have to do and you just get on with it. Sometimes we have a lot of unprocessed trauma and grief. And I think that post-treatment, a lot of anxiety and a lot of sleep disturbance is that grief and trauma sort of trying to get into our conscious mind so we can process it. So one of the bigger things that helps with anxiety is to actually talk about your experience with other women who understand it, or with a therapist, or in a group. It doesn't have to be a therapist, it's just talking about your experience. As you say it out loud, you hear it, and I think it has a very healing impact.
Thank you. So again, I want to thank you all so much for being a part of this panel tonight. Like I said, there are so many comments and feedback in the chat box. If you have a chance, have a read through some of those. Your rawness and realness it just exuded through the screen. And we thank you so much for just inspiring us all tonight. So thank you all very much for joining us tonight.